This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Hey there, working listeners. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later in the show. It's from our partners at Macy's. In its work with the nonprofit APIA Scholars, Macy's is committed to making a difference in the lives of Asian and Pacific Islander students across the country. From May 1st to 31st, you can support APIA Scholars by rounding up your Macy's in-store purchase or donating online. These funds will equip Asian and Pacific Islander American students with the tools and resources they need to prepare for academic, personal, and professional success. Stick around to hear from Noor, an APIA scholar.
I said, well, what about that one and that one? And so all of these paintings were by this famous Danish writer. And she said, she was supremely gifted in so many different things. And so few people really know how multi-talented and multifaceted she really is.
Welcome back to Working. I'm your host, Karen Hahn.
And I'm your other host, June Thomas.
Hello, June. How are you?
Karen, I am swell. Thank you for asking.
Of course. And so whose voice did we just hear at the top of the show?
So that was Connie Nielsen, the Danish actress who listeners may know from such movies as Gladiator, Wonder Woman, or Brothers. So my excuse for talking to the Queen of the Amazons was that she is starring in The Dreamer, which is a new 6-part biopic of the Danish writer Karen Blixen, whose pen name was Isaac Dinesen, who is also the person that Meryl Streep played in Out of Africa.
That's so cool. I cannot wait to hear about the process, especially because I actually haven't heard of Karen Blixen before. But before we get to that, what can we look forward to for Slate Plus this week?
So in addition to playing the title character, Connie Nielsen was also the executive producer of The Dreamer. And since that title can and does seem to mean different things on different shows, I asked her what it involved in this case. And it was really interesting. Then we talked about how the popularity of the Nordic noir genre has shaped the way outsiders think of Scandinavian culture.
Oh, that's so fun, especially because you are right. Nordic noir has kind of blown up over the last decade or so. So I'm very excited to listen to that. Slate Plus members will hear that at the end of the episode, but if you're not a Slate Plus member but want to hear the segment, why not join Slate Plus? As a member, you'll get no ads on any of our podcasts, unlimited reading on the Slate site, and member-exclusive episodes and segments from our show and other shows like The Waves, Culture Gabfest, and Amicus. Sign up for Slate Plus now at slate.com/workingplus to access all of Slate's content and to support our work. All right, let's hear June's conversation with Connie Nielsen.
Connie Nielsen, thank you so much for joining us on Working.
It is such a pleasure to be here.
So we're excited to talk to you today about The Dreamer, which is a 6-part series in which you star as the Danish writer Karen Blixen, who wrote as Isaac Dinesen. And the show is now available on a new Nordic streaming service called Viaplay. I'm really curious, how did you become involved in this project and what attracted you to The Dreamer?
Well, I actually wrote the concept for the whole story, and it had been a while since I was obsessed with Karen Blixen. Around 4 years ago, I was doing press in Denmark for a new series that I had made in Africa. And because of the Africa connection, and what I was making was an anti-colonialist piece. And so I think, because of all of these synergies and symmetries, the press conference was held at the Karen Blixen Museum, where I just adroitly sort of like avoided the museum director the whole day. And I was like literally sneaking out a back door to get home when I see this painting out of the sort of left eyeball on the side, and I just step back out of the door and like move towards the room where I see this kind of luminous drawing. And, you know, it's a simple graphite and white paper drawing. So to call it luminous is maybe weird. But there is a whiteness or a light that's emanating from this graphite drawing of a classical bust. It's beautifully done. It still hums with energy. So I lean in and I look at it, and behind me, it's literally like out of a movie. Like I jump with fright. I hear a voice all of a sudden say, Karen painted that when she was 17. And she's like, you know, another thing that people don't know is that she didn't start writing until she was 46. And I was like, what? Yeah. She only started writing because she had to. She was 46 years old. She had lost a lot of her family's money in an investment in a coffee farm in Africa that had gone south despite her most valiant efforts. She was therefore not going to have any more money. And as a woman, she wasn't going to inherit anything at all. She's supposed to have married into money, but her husband has divorced her after giving her syphilis. Was so sick by the time she reaches Denmark in the autumn of 1934. She is skin and bones. She is suicidal. She has, in fact, had one suicide attempt at this point and is just wanting to die. Her boyfriend has not only not helped her, he's also left her. There's nothing left. She is nobody and will now be expected at the age of 46 to please just go and die very quietly in a corner, slowly, preferably. And that's what she comes home to. She comes home to, yes, what looks like a grand house, but the real money has gone. That is where our series started. Right. Because I was like, how many women reach their mid-40s and kind of realize how much of themselves they have given to their kids, to their partners, to their parents, to their friends? We know that women end up at that age and in retirement with 30% less money than their male peers. It is expensive to be a woman. Expensive. But that is the moment where Karen Blixen found her fire. She found the fire of her intellect.
And she starts to write, which is the story of the series. You mentioned that she's basically skin and bones when she returns to Denmark. She's miserable. She's sick mentally and physically, and she's weak mentally and physically, very fragile. And I know you're an actress, but you are Wonder Woman's mother. I just like, so clearly there's a transformation that happened, a physical transformation as well as a projection. We're used to actors putting on weight for roles, but how did you make yourself into this physically fragile person?
So that was quite literally so daunting because, you know, the only way to really get rid of muscle is to starve the muscle, you know, so I had to stop working out, and I had put on like 5 kilos of muscle. That's 10 pounds, 11 pounds of muscle during Wonder Woman and Justice League. And that stuff doesn't just go away, thankfully, thank God. But obviously I couldn't look like a glamazon when I was playing a person who's known for being like small and skinny like a sparrow. And most people remember Karen from the later age, like the pictures, the famous pictures by Cecil Beaton and also by Peter Beard, where she looks like this witch. She's very proud of the fact that, in fact, she looks like a witch at that time. But she's in her 70s, whereas I'm playing her in her 40s. And so she had more roundness, but she was by no means an Amazon. That she was not. So I had to get rid of that. At the same time, the writer now calls me and tells me, yeah, we're going to have you play the 3 characters that represent the various types of allowed femininity in her story, The Dreamers. And so that meant that I had to, also prepare for being in a very scanty outfit on like doing a striptease on a stage
right.
and like these other really idealized people, which of course as an actor, I went like, yes, but also as a person went like, oh my God, how am I supposed to do this? And it was hard. I started doing like 2-day water fasts every week.
Oh my God.
And then during the rest of the week, I would do intermittent fasting. So I only had 1 day of eating normally, and that was Sunday. The rest of the time for 2 months, I just basically had to just starve. And I did. And I was shooting, her at her weakest. And so I had to really just, I think, torture my body in order to not look healthy.
Yeah.
My hair started falling out. Thank God I was wearing a wig during that time. And then after 2 months, I realized that in 1 month, I was going to start shooting all of those other scenes where I'm the idealized character. So then I started having to work out at 4:30 in the morning. That was the only time there was room for in my schedule, and start eating like so much protein and so much fat just to start getting into shape for these other characters again.
Wow.
It was nuts during that time. Yeah.
I got to say, that sounds nuts.
Yeah.
Connie, you have a reputation as one of those actors who really enjoys doing research about your character and the period the story's based in. You've talked a little bit about how you became almost entranced, it sounded like, by Karen Blixen when you were at the museum. What did you do to help you find your version of Karen Blixen? What kind of research did you do? She is a Danish icon. But I felt like whatever we do as women, we have to resuscitate many times the sort of reputation of female artists who have been sort of maltreated at the hands of posterity. There was no one left speaking up for her. And I felt like that's not right. That's not right. What I also had been irritated with for a long time was that every film or every TV series about a female artist, especially with painters, invariably becomes about their sex life. Mm-hmm. And it's like women cannot escape their bodies. Like we cannot escape our body. We are consistently referred to within the realm of the body, just like Socrates. And since then, just thousands maybe of writers and philosophers, all male, have relegated us to that sphere. And you still see that in film. It's never about what is the actual intellectual and creative process of a person. A person. And because she's female, what is the uniqueness about the female version of life and how that process moves through you? Because as a woman, we will have very specific and different wounds. We will have the wound of being just consequently and insistently denied value. And I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of it. And I wanted to show how Karen feels that way too, because she did, and she does. Once she became famous, she was more sort of blasé about it. But in her letters and in her work,
prior to that, it was like pounding on doors, and no one was opening them.
Well, I have to say that really does come through in the series. But I also was aware that even as a feminist, there's a feeling that she's so determined and she will exploit any connection. And she upsets people. And you understand she has to. This is her only chance. See, there's nothing else she can do unless she wants to sit in that corner for the rest of her life. However, it's hard to watch because she's hurting her family.
She's hurting a family that, in turn are very willing to hurt and denigrate her. But we were very conscious of that, we were very conscious of the brutal side of the artist. And we were not going to shy away from making a multifaceted view of a person. The thing is, if it were a guy doing the same thing, which they do and did throughout the ages, yes, with nobody sitting here and speaking, well, the way they treated their family was, quite frankly, a little bit disturbing. We wanted to show a complex person, someone who is real. And she was. I don't think that it's possible to live this life and not find yourself in moments where you are going to be selfish.
I'm curious, having explored Karen, having represented this breadth of her character, including the selfishness, including this single-minded determination, did you like her less after you'd finished making The Dreamer or more? Like, did it affect your your sense of her, your admiration for her, or just how you felt for her generally? I don't want to put words in your mouth about your attitude to her.
No, not at all. I went in doing this series knowing everything about her that I could find. I also feel like I was praying to her spirit all the time and asking for forgiveness all the time, in case I got shit wrong. I'm also a super sensitive kind of person in the way that she is not. And so sometimes I wish that I were more like her. I do find that it's more difficult being a sensitive than it is to not be. But, there is also a wonderful saying that the cynic is a thwarted romantic. And so I can only believe that somewhere, that refers to the fact that people who are insensitive are potentially people who were wounded.
Right.
And have not had the ability to change that, Yeah. In other words, I come at her with compassion. Yes, I felt a lot of compassion for her. And I think that is an actor's job. It's a director's job to have compassion for all the characters, but it's my job as an actor to have compassion for my character, but to also at the same time, when I'm showing the ugly in her, to do so with honesty.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more of June's conversation with Connie Nielsen after this.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Macy's. Hey y'all, what's up? It's your girl, Anavani. I'm a writer, creator, and a change maker. And when you're a young adult, so much important change begins with access to higher education and resources. And that's why Macy supports APIA Scholars. It's a nonprofit devoted to the academic, personal, and professional success of Asian and Pacific Islander Americans. And it's on a mission to support young adults like Noor.
My name is Noor Ali, and I am an APIA Scholar. The way that I grew up, I was low-income first-generation college student. APIA Scholars played such a big part of my undergraduate career. The scholarship actually gave a really good boost to my savings and just made me not worried about any unexpected costs like my laptop breaking or me needing a new textbook. I've been able to get a mentor through the APIA Scholarship Mentorship Program who has been guiding me through graduate applications. My goal is to pursue a doctorate in clinical psychology with a focus on mental health for Asian Americans and other underserved communities. When you round up your Macy's purchase, you're not just supporting APIA Scholars, but you're supporting the Asian American community.
Now's the time to support APIA scholars like Noor. This May, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, when you round up your purchase at Macy's or donate online, you'll help fund access to leadership development programs, mental health support, and peer mentorships through APIA Scholars. Give back and learn more at macys.com/purpose.
This episode is brought to you by Bank of America. If you own or operate a business, whether it's a local operation or a global corporation, partnering with Bank of America could be your smartest move. By teaming with Bank of America, you'll enjoy exclusive digital tools, award-winning insights, and business solutions so powerful, you'll make every move matter. Position your business to capitalize on opportunity in a moment's notice. Visit bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness to learn more. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America, N.A., copyright 2023. Hello, listeners. We want to hear from you. Whether it's to ask us for advice on a creative problem, tell us a guest you'd like to hear on the show, or to share your own creative triumphs, drop us a line at working@slate.com or give us a ring at 304-933-WORK. And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Working wherever you get your podcasts. Now let's return to June's conversation with Connie Nielsen.
Almost all of your very impressive acting credits have been in English, or in the early days of your career, especially French or Italian. I know you are a polyglot. My count might be slightly off, but I think that only 3 of your 60 IMDb credits are in Danish. So yeah. I'm curious, did you approach this role differently because it was in Danish? I know you had a very big hit of a Danish movie some years ago.
Brothers.
Yeah. So how did it feel?
Oh, great. I think one of the things that actually made me laugh was that the Danish critics were like, yeah, you can hear a little bit of her accent. And I was like, dude, I was speaking like fucking Karen Blixen. Really?
Yeah.
I feel very happy about the fact that I'm an American now and I'm also Danish. I really think that suits me. This is dual citizenship. I'm a very civic person, and I love being able to contribute to my community, and being an American allows me to do so here. But I also have this great love of my country of birth. And I think that I've been received with so much acceptance and respect and love by Danish viewers and Danish critics. I'm extremely, extremely grateful for that. Seriously, it's not easy to be the foreigner coming home, and so yep. I've definitely been very happy about that. But I did start my career in Paris and then, continued it in Italy in my early 20s. And then from my mid-20s, resolutely turned towards America, which I felt was the place where I was allowed to be taken seriously and not have my height and my features held against me in terms of being an artist, whereas I felt that was not the case in Italy and in France. And so I have been more than grateful for the opportunities that American films have afforded me. It's great to be polyglot because, yes, I've gone back and I've done films in Paris and in Italy that are wonderful pieces of work as well, like Demon Lover with Olivier Assayas, and other Italian movies as well that I'm very proud of. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity that language affords me. I also just love the day-to-day thing of being able to speak to people in their own idioms.
Yeah. Well, I don't know to what extent The Dreamer was made with non-Danish or non-Scandinavian audiences in mind, but there were a couple of places where I had a very strong feeling that I was missing something because I don't speak Danish. Karen's mother seemed to have a different kind of accent, and I was very fascinated by that.
You were totally right, because I was speaking this more archaic Danish because Karen did. I modulated it a lot, but it was so interesting that with the 2 elderly actresses playing my mother and my aunt, they speak a specific type of Danish that they were taught to speak back in the 50s and 60s. So it's a little bit like the Cary Grant kind of American. It's the same thing. Yeah. You're absolutely right. And then you have the younger Danes that speak like this very open voweled kind and like much more soft consonants than the older generation did. And then there was mine, which I spoke in a Karen Blixen accent that was even older than, because it's from the 30s. So you're not wrong at all. That was there.
But then also when you spoke in English, when Karen spoke in English, that wasn't your speaking voice in English.
That was Karen Blixen's accent. And so, Karen Blixen had like a whole narrative about the role of the storyteller in any community. And it's sort of like a European thing where when you go to acting school and you start with Greek theater, you learn about the origin of the theater, which was the storyteller, like the Ovidian storyteller who is walking from village to village and sitting around the campfire and speaking these lines, these beautiful, poetic, iambic, pentameter lines, this rhythmic Greek pentameter. And for Karen, that moment, that's magic. That is you grasping the fire of the gods and speaking to like the sphere of humanity.
Mm-hmm. In The Dreamer, she seems to be hallucinating her stories, which in a way is kind of what you do when you go to the movies and you kind of have almost like a living dream that you're experiencing.
Yeah. And I think that when you are a writer and you are in that trance, yes, there's a part of writing it's just real hard work and it's technique and it's you finding your structure of language. And that's so beautiful and so interesting. And then there is also Karen's unique contribution, which is this idea that you're making tales, that the tales have this heightened atmosphere. It's a little bit more in the style of Mary Shelley than it is in the style of, George Orwell, who was her contemporary. And so she heightens that by taking the scenes into a golden age 100 to 150 years earlier, a time when life was not so organized. There was no electricity yet. And so there was a lot more potential for accident, for a magical accident. And I think she has a lot more in common with Renaissance writers than she has with her contemporaries. And she loved that. And she loved the promise of the Enlightenment. She just loved that idea that ideas can be discussed and we can become smarter with the discussion.
I mean, it's interesting, though, that even though her family did not treat her well, they put her off in that chair in the corner, but they seemed to be quite an intellectual family. People were writers. I was very curious about that sort of slice of I guess, society. Can you talk about the kind of family she came from, and if there were things that even you needed to learn about that slice of Danish social history, the history of the Danish class system, because they seemed very upper class, very intellectual, but I don't know if that's my projection onto them.
Well, I mean, that brings up a lot of interesting things. I come from a culture, Danish culture, of reading. Reading is part of being human. It's part of developing your humanity. Having knowledge is not for you to be some witty reference at a dinner party showing off your scintillating whatever. No, it's about developing your soul. It's about developing your humanity. And that is something that has been through centuries of European societies. It is stunning to me that, having raised 5 boys, that it's this hard to get people to read. I mean, I have quite literally stuffed their rooms with books and told them about and read to them. And it just feels as if the last 2 generations are just not as taken with the promise of reading. For my older kids, it's really more about information, data. Whereas for me, it's about language, and it's about a thickening of the intricacy of thought and of associative thinking and all of these different ways in which reading influences your mind. Mm-hmm. It's because it trains your brain in different thought patterns.
And that was the kind of family that Karen came from.
That is what she grew up with. Like, if you were worth your own salt, you were thinking. And if you were thinking, you were writing. And if you were writing, you were sending your things into some journal. Karen's father wrote about hunting because he loved hunting. He wrote about his year in Minnesota with this Indian tribe. Everything was about expressing your lived reality, but also your thinking. And this is where, Karen's sister has not survived very well into posterity, because there is also the other side to it, which is self-referential dilettantism. And, and how do you know the difference, especially if your husband is the publisher?
He's just in the business, Connie. He's not involved in the, let's be clear.
But there was a sanctimoniousness about it that I just thought was so beautiful, and I mean, obviously, is ripe for exploitation for comedy, right? In our piece.
Yeah, that definitely comes through. I'm ashamed to say that I have never read any Isaac Dinesen, but I have seen Out of Africa, and I suspect that a lot of English speakers are likely in that same boat. What was it like to know that people would be comparing your version of Karen Blixen with Meryl Streep's?
We were like, well, that's obviously iconic. All of us probably saw it back in the 80s when it came out. We're not going to rewatch it, and we're not going to have that in our minds. We're just basically going to ignore it. Also because it basically speaks to the Karen Blixen sort of romantic idealization, whereas we were coming at it with, well, here's the dirty truth.
Yeah. The thing that really struck me in The Dreamer, she was off doing something. She was talking with one of her nieces, and then they call her in to do the singing. And I think, I just want to call everybody in to do singing, because, like, what was that about? Is that a thing that is common, or is that just something that the Blixens did?
Oh, this was common in America as well. When I moved into this house, the owner, who was the niece of the first woman who owned this house. This has only been owned by women. And it was built by a woman back in 1936. And when the niece, Robin, was a kid, she would come here on vacation. And she left me her aunt's piano.
Oh, yes.
Right there.
Aww.
And she said, I have only the most incredible memories of my life in this house. When I was little, I was lying in the bedroom and I was listening to the adults, and it was my aunt playing the piano and all of the adults singing together. So this was back in the 40s, right? And this was normal. This was entertainment before the TV. So before TV, people sang together. They sang. They read together. That was normal.
Well, it's lovely.
And so on Sundays, of course, you would also mix piety with singing as well. So even at Zentropa, one of the biggest production companies in Denmark, I think until recently, they would start every morning with a morning song. We would start school when I was growing up with a morning song. And we had like this large, giant book, like this big, of like psalms and songs that you would sing from that were like speaking about the glory of Denmark and the beautiful rolling hills and the clouds.
And Karen Blixen.
Yeah.
Connie Nielsen, I'm so grateful to you for the time you spent with us today on Working. It's so nice to talk to you. It's a beautiful show. The Dreamer, streaming on Viaplay. Thank you so much for visiting with us on Working.
Oh my gosh, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Up next, June and I will talk about pushing yourself for your art. Stick around. At the end of your first year, Discover credit cards automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right, everything you earned doubled. All the cash back from eating at your favorite soup dumpling restaurant doubled. All the cash back from that trip where you sort of learned to snowboard also doubled. And the best part, you don't have to do anything ridiculous to get it. Nope, Discover does it automatically. Seriously though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey listeners, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you, fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
So I loved Connie's description of her encounter with that graphite piece by Karen Blixen, because I do often feel like you can look and look and look for something to inspire you. But the thing about art is that ultimately you can't really force creativity to come to you, as we know from numerous discussions about it on this show. You just never know when something's going to hit you like that, even if you feel like you've already cultivated a passion for a certain subject. And I'm curious if you've ever had a, light bulb moment like that.
Oh man, definitely. And it's often really inconvenient. When I was finishing up the first draft of my book, and I'll be honest, I was a little tight on time, and I knew that I should be very strategic, figure out how many days I had before my submission deadline and how many words I wanted to write and approach it in a very calculated manner. And for the most part, I did. I was quite focused, but there were a couple of times where I just got interested, like fascinated in what I knew to be a bit of a side quest. Rationally, I knew that it's important, just couldn't justify my taking more than, sort of a couple of hours to chase down the information and write it up.
Right.
But I also couldn't stop myself, from digging. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's maybe something I'll return to at a later date. But while I was writing a book about lesbian spaces, I became fascinated with certain rococo elements of the private venture capital world and how those kinds of investments can affect independent businesses. So I definitely recognized the experience that Connie Nielsen described, where you're not looking to get involved. In fact, you're actively trying to turn your back on something. But somehow, it just pulls you in.
I did laugh so much when she was like, I was trying to avoid the museum curator the whole night. But speaking of these kinds of, extremes and extreme experiences, there's also not just the mental extreme of this inspiration in Connie's journey with Karen Blixen, but also this journey of physical extremes as she's shooting the series, as she described, like starving herself, but then having to bulk up a little bit again for other parts of the show. She's obviously okay on the other side of the shooting experience because she can come talk to us about it.
Right.
But putting yourself through that kind of grueling experience, like the phrase, you have to suffer for your art, exists for a reason, though I don't know that it's always true. In this case, obviously, she did want to look the part practically, as opposed to, employing CGI to make herself look so small. But I think the key here is that it has to be your conscious choice to do this, and also be done in a way that it won't kill you, right? And also to know that it's not like required that you do this. What do you think of that philosophy?
I agree with you fully. I think that's very well put. I'm not going to claim to know Connie Nielsen. We spent an hour together talking on Zoom, but I got a very strong impression that she's the kind of woman who knows her limits and is confident enough in her position in the industry and in life to stick to them. So that feels important. Isaac and I discussed a similar topic in last week's episode of Working, when he talked with opera singer Ryan Speedo Green, who lost more than 60 pounds for a role at the Met. He started off at more than 300 pounds, though. And it's in that context, it's easier to see that kind of weight loss as healthy, whereas it's hard to picture basically one day of normal eating per week as anything but the opposite. Yeah. One thing that strikes me, though, is that in a Danish language series where the Danes who were watching would have a clear image in their heads of the real Karen Blixen, who really was this waif-like creature, and then non-Danish speakers maybe paying extra attention to appearances since they can't understand the words that people are speaking. Like, all of that might have provided extra incentive to go through that very intensive process that she described.
Yeah. I guess the bottom line is like, know your limits. And also specifically with regards to physical transformations like this, like no matter what you're doing, whether it's gaining weight, maintaining weight, or losing weight, make sure that you are being healthy. Like that is really the only important thing, is like, be healthy, make sure that you are okay. It does not really matter outside of that. And with that in mind, how much do you push yourself when you're working? Does that change like how much you want to push yourself when you're working on something you're really passionate about versus something that's maybe a little more run of the mill to you? Like, how far are you willing to go? I know obviously that our personal lines of work are much less demanding than that. And maybe this question is just about how late either of us are willing to stay up or how long we're willing to go without taking a break. But what to you is acceptable in your work, and what is off limits or otherwise not worth it in terms of these boundaries? Yeah.
Well, I first appreciate you saying like what the specifics are in our particular line of work. You know, with my soft hands, I'm very aware that, you know, I'm a writer rather than a miner or a mill worker. But this is probably the most important thing I've learned as I've spent more time as a journalist and a writer. It is really important to use your time intentionally and intelligently. And that doesn't just mean that you can't screw around all day, start late and finish early and watch 10 hours of TV. I mean, you can't. But other than in very exceptional circumstances, like the very final deadline of a big project or something truly extraordinary, the best way to do good work is just to be careful about boring things like getting enough sleep and scheduling your day wisely so you have focus time and replenishment time and, you know, things we talk about on this show. It's better to work 8 hours where you minimize distractions and use all the strategies at your disposal to be able to do deep work than it is to sit up all night or force yourself to stay at your desk for 20 hours straight trying to finish something. I definitely did that early in my career because I didn't know how else to get everything done. And now I realize that the secret is knowing the limits of what you can get done and not even trying to exceed them.
Yeah, that's really, really smart. Like, knowing your limits is such an important thing, and also sometimes a hard thing to come around to, because you really only know through experience. And while we're talking about experience, I think there's also a different kind of extreme from the ones that we've just talked about and that you discussed with Connie in terms of how to balance your life and art. Because there's two kind of juggling acts that Connie describes that she had to accomplish. Number one, juggling her life and what she had to do for this series. As she describes, like she had to wake up at 4 a.m. to work out because that was the only time that she had in her schedule. And then juggling what she wants out of life versus the kinds of stereotypes and pressures that are put upon women that can often limit us. I won't be so presumptuous as to say, I know you've also experienced the difficulty of balancing these things in your life. So instead, I will ask, have you encountered this kind of difficulty and how have you dealt with it?
You know, Karen, I have to say, I am very conscious of having made certain choices that have made it a lot easier for me to find that balance. And it is for most women. I don't have children and I never wanted them. Like, that wasn't a sacrifice that I made. I opted out of certain appearance related things that I know can take up a lot of time each and every day and are not optional for many women. And I also have an incredibly supportive partner who really does more than her fair share when I am in a particularly intense period of work. So all of that said, I'm not sure that that is a choice that a lot of women can make, not only because of all the things they have to do, but because it requires certain innate attitudes. You know, I didn't want things. And so that makes it so much easier not to have them. But you know what? I am really grateful to Connie Nielsen for spelling that out. You know, at this point, she's rich. She's in the DC Cinematic Universe movies. She has a lovely house and 5 children. But the only way she makes that work is to be incredibly single-minded, just as Karen Blixen was 90 years ago.
I actually didn't know she had 5 kids, which makes what I'm about to ask, I think, a little funnier to me personally, because she talked about like struggling to get her kids to read. Because on that subject, while we're talking about these kind of essential qualities of art, I really loved what she said about reading and otherwise appreciating art being a key part of developing your humanity. I think that ties into what we've talked about how anything can technically be creative work, from going to see movies to, as per your conversation, reading books. When we talk about writing too, we also say that the best way to learn how to write well is to read.
Yeah.
How much of a reader are you, and what books have had the biggest effect on you?
When I was a kid, I would say that a lot of my identity was invested in being a reader. You know, that was what set me apart. And, you know, it allowed me to have a very different life from everybody else in my family. I was the first person to go to college. And I didn't always read what I was supposed to. You know, like I could never quite keep up with the reading when I was at university. But it was because there was always something else that I was more interested in reading, you know, usually American magazines or lesbian novels. And long term, that seems like it was a good choice, but it would probably have been better if I could just have read what I was supposed to. But that wasn't to be. But anyway, I've always been a big reader. But you know what? A few years ago, I had a bit of a crisis. And I think it was related somewhat to something Connie said about her kids, where she said that for them, it's about information, data. You know, obviously, as nonfiction writers, we have to do a lot of that kind of reading where we have to become an expert on a topic in a short period of time. And I was doing so much of that I think I kind of forgot how to read for fun. And although I think I fixed that dysfunction by turning to audiobooks for when it comes to reading for pleasure, I do still feel a bit broken because I still find it really hard to just sit down and get lost in a book, like a book. You know, it could just be that I haven't yet found my ideal reading location in this apartment. I'm very conscious of that.
Yeah.
But what about you? You must be a big reader.
Actually, no, not really. Which is something that I want to change, because I was a very, very diligent reader when I was younger. I would say pretty much through high school. But then, like, when you get to college and stuff, all the reading that I was doing was definitely required reading. Like, everything that I read was assigned to me. And I think because of doing that for such a long time, once I got out of college, I just didn't really read for pleasure very much. More clearly, I didn't read books for pleasure. Like, I was still an avid reader, but it would be of like reviews of cultural criticism and things like that. Like, that's what I was seeking out. And it's tougher to devote that kind of time, I think, the more you grow older to a book. Well, I mean, this is just me personally. I know a lot of people who are still very voracious readers, so it is just a me problem. Yeah. But just because, like, there are so many other things I want to do. I want to watch this TV show. I want to watch this movie. I want to go to this place. I want to see that museum. But it's something I definitely want to get better at, especially as I think about, like, the books that I really enjoyed when I was younger. And I'm like, oh, I want to reread that. Or I hear about a really cool book and I'm like, oh, I want to check that out. But still, right now, the bulk of my reading diet is articles, like news, magazines, newspapers, etc.
Yeah. As I say, I consider myself a reader. You know, when we moved, almost all of the things we shipped across the world were books. Yeah. You know, thousands of them. But I don't know that in my own home, not when I'm on vacation, but in my own home, I'm not sure how many times I've like sat down in the prime hours of the evening and read a book. Right. Yeah. You know, less than 10 for sure. It's just not something I do. For that kind of downtime, of course I'm going to watch TV. I'm maybe going to watch a movie. To me, like, those are the real readers. Like, at night, when they could be watching TV, they're reading. Yeah. You know, that's crazy to me. Okay, back to your other question, which though was about the books that have had the biggest effect on me. It's interesting because they're not always the books that I think are the best books, you know? I suspect that the ones that have changed me the most are the books that have an emotional impact, either because they contain something that I can relate to and that I've rarely seen reflected in books. You know, I'm thinking maybe of Trash by Dorothy Allison, or maybe Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. Or books that are kind of inspirational in terms of showing how good a journalistic book can be. Say Nothing or Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe come to mind in that regard. Or Sarah Schulman's Let the Record Show about the history of ACT UP New York. Big book, but oh man, so good. And like, you just want to kind of, you want to do a book like that, you know? What books would you put in that category?
I think there are like 4 or 5 that I would name, like, but they're all about either how they accomplished telling the story that they were going to tell, or like something specific about that person's writing. Like one of the books I'd bring up is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, which is such a heavy and dense book. And it's it's written in such an academic way, but not in a way that feels dry or boring, which is like a huge accomplishment. Because like one of the big things that I struggled to get over in my early writing especially was getting over sounding too academic and dry and boring. Reading that book in particular, where it's like reams of footnotes and it's still like so fun to go into them, I was like, this is remarkable. And then The Westing Game was a big one that I read when I was younger, which is a very like quick read, but so fun. It's, I guess, more often than not described as a children's novel or like young adult novel because it's pretty small, again, and like centers on a young girl as the main character. But this mystery is carried off in such a fun, inventive way that I've read it again as an adult and still really loved it. Just like blew through it because I was like, oh, this is so great. And then like the Redwall series was huge to me when I was a teenager by Brian Schock, which is about like mostly a bunch of anthropomorphic animals going about their lives in like a semi-medieval setting. And the descriptions of food in that are like huge to me. One of my favorite Twitter accounts is just Redwall Feast Spot, I think is what it's called. And it just tweets out the descriptions of food in the books. And every time I read them, I'm like, ugh, I wish I was that little mouse eating this meal. And I know I said 4 or 5. So really quickly, the other ones I would say I was number 1 is The Hobbit, because my mom would read that to me when I was little. And so that was kind of just a very indelible story to me. And House of Leaves, which is best known because it's so experimental. Like the way that it's written is not straightforward at all. There are pages that fold out. Like it's very, very strange, but so scary to read. And I really, really loved it. And all of these books have something that I wish I could accomplish in my own art, where it's unpredictable or just really engrossing in some way.
Wow. Well, I have to say, just listening to you talk about them, I can hear you being excited just like thinking about those books. So that's amazing. Like that really does just show like how books can grab us and just change our mood and change our perspective and all of those great things.
Yeah, it is like it's
cool.
such a singular art form. And okay, I think what we were saying was like, oh, I could also be watching TV or movies. Like, I think it's just the fact that there is so much rich art out there that we can get into. Yeah. It's not that I'm neglecting books or neglecting TV. It's just that like there's always something to look at that you have to be really conscious of devoting more time to one particular form if you really want to be doing more of that.
Yeah, no, totally. What we were saying before, there are only so many hours.
Exactly.
You have to make decisions about how to spend them, and you got to sleep. That's the most important thing of all. You got to get good sleep.
Exactly. So if it is nighttime and you're listening to this episode of the podcast, turn it off and go to sleep. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and if you have, remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and then you'll never miss an episode. And just a reminder that by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on shows like the Waves and Clutter Gabfest, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. To learn more, go to slate.com/workingplus.
Tack to Connie Nielsen, and thanks to our producer this week, Kevin Bendis, and to our series producer, Cameron Drews. We'll be back next week with Karen's conversation with Hannah Yim and Justine Wan, the subtitle translators for SBS Animal Farm. Until then, get back to work.
This episode is brought to you by Bank of America. If you own or operate a business, whether it's a local operation or a global corporation, partnering with Bank of America could be your smartest move. By teaming with Bank of America, you'll enjoy exclusive digital tools, award-winning insights, and business solutions so powerful, you'll make every move matter. Position your business to capitalize on opportunity in a moment's notice. Visit bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness to learn more. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America, N.A., copyright 2023.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs.
Vic said something.
Music.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.